Every Saturday, I face anxiety. Y'all laughing, because you know, right? Saturday's the day I prepare for standing up here to give you a message from God. Every Saturday, I am anxious, and yesterday was no different, except perhaps in the fact that I spent a lot longer time feeling that anxiety. Maybe it is because I'm actually preaching hope in the face of anxiety, so I've had to give anxiety a little bit of thought, as well as giving hope a little bit of thought. You know, all of us experience anxiety, all of us, and sometimes anxiety is good. It can prepare us for situations that we need to be prepared for, and sometimes anxiety isn't good. Sometimes anxiety can just ramp up so much that we can't prepare for anything. It becomes overwhelming and debilitating. In anxiety disorders, anxiety is problematic. The National Alliance of Mental Illness says that anxiety disorders are the most common mental health issues in the United States. Over 40 million people, over 19% of our population experience anxiety disorders. And 7% of children ages 3 through 17 experience some issue with anxiety every year. This pandemic has not helped. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention has reported a 5% increase in anxiety disorders since August of last year to February of this year, mostly among adults aged 18 to 29. Nobody is beyond exposure to anxiety. And if it's an anxiety disorder, it can mean excessive worry, seeing situations as being threatening when they might not actually be. It causes us to see danger and dangerous signs everywhere. It can bring on feelings of apprehension or dread. It can make us tense, jumpy, irritable, restless. We can have our hearts race, get shortness of breath, feel sweats and tremors and headaches, insomnia, upset stomachs. I don't have an anxiety disorder, at least that I know of, but I know anxiety. And yesterday's anxiety made it really hard for me to focus, really hard for me to even start something, really hard for me to finish my thought. All I really wanted to do was have a snack and fill up my water bottle and check the mail and walk the dog and give the dog a treat and make sure the dog was fed. And really, all I really wanted to do was nap. I didn't. I just sat in my preaching, writing chair and worried. You know, I believe in hope. I do. I count on hope. Hope is as real as anxiety is real. But what exactly do we mean when we say hope? What exactly does hope look like? What can I tell you about how to get hope? What can I possibly say that won't sound like simplification, platitudes, or placebos? What can I say that might actually strike a chord of truth for you? And especially speaking as one who does not suffer from anxiety disorders and does not know exactly how debilitating that can be, what can I say to you? I tell you, for those of you who do suffer from anxiety disorders, I will not tell you that you just need to have more faith. I will tell you that there is no shame, that God does not want you to suffer this, and that there are people who can help, who want to help, and who will help. The National Alliance of Mental Illness, their website is a great resource, as is our very own New Life Counseling Center. But as far as hope goes, I came up with three things that speak truth to me. And just so you know, I think this is the very first time I have ever preached a sermon with 3 points. Number one, be intentional about what you take in. 24/7 news isn't necessary. Checking your emails when you have time off is not relaxing. Taking in and surrounding yourself with content or people that is pessimistic or depressing is not helpful. I was in Denver for a week a few weeks ago. I did not listen to the news. I did not answer my church emails. I did not even watch television at all. The only thing I did was watch my 6-month-old granddaughter. I watched my 6-month-old granddaughter, and I got to experience the world through her. Do you know how exciting it is to be able to hold on to Granny's fingers and use your legs to stand up? Who knew that legs could be so strong? My granddaughter does, and every time she did it, her face beamed. Did you know how amazing it is to listen carefully and let the sounds catch your attention and draw your eyes towards the birds singing on the fence, or the sprinklers that just came on across the street, or the wind that's blowing through the leaves on the trees? Do you know how incredible it feels to lie on your back and have your hands discover your feet and to be able to hold on to them and then roll back and forth and just giggle? Do you know how joyful it is to watch a child learn? Now, I know joy and hope are not the same thing, but I'm pretty sure that hope hangs out with joy. So be intentional about what you take in. Spend time doing the things that make you joyful. Number 2, we tell ourselves stories. So be part of the right one. Friday, I sent a text message to my daughters. It said, I'm glad to say that I'm still alive. I'm quite sure my daughters weren't wondering whether or not I was. It wasn't a question relevant to them at that moment. It was, however, a potentially relevant question for me. Let me start at the beginning. You might remember a while ago, I told you a story about cutting down my bougainvillea bush, right? Yeah, back then I used a bypass lopper to trim. I used that. Actually, yesterday I didn't even know the name of that tool. Some of you might not even know what I'm talking about. You would recognize it, a bypass lopper. If you don't know, that's okay. The important thing for you to know this morning about a bypass lopper is that it is not a power tool. It does not plug in. So many of you, after hearing the story of me trimming my bougainvillea bush, warned me that it would come back. It did. Despite the fact that I had trimmed it down to just a few sticks coming up out of the ground at about just a foot tall, it came back to be a fully formed bush with stems reaching 10 feet up in the air. I decided I needed a power tool. I bought a 22-inch hedge trimmer with a battery packed. I had never in my life used a power tool with sharp blades before. I read the instruction manual completely, and I paid special attention to all the warnings. There were about a dozen of them. Wear eye protection, avoid loose-fitting clothes, use both hands while operating, and take out the battery pack when making any adjustments in the case of accidental starting. Yeah, that was the phrase that got me, accidental starting. Some of you might remember that I had told you a story about living in my home that has some interesting things happening in it, my home where my vacuum cleaner will turn on for no reason at 2 a.m. in the morning. I haven't told you this story, but my food processor also turns on the moment I plug it in, even though the switch is to off. It does not wait for me to turn it on. And if I haven't yet put the lid on it, it makes a great mess. And just recently, my toaster has decided to eject the toast prematurely after just about 2 seconds. In my home, accidental starting is a real concern. And with those 2 little words, I let my anxiety create a full-blown story, many full-blown stories, all of which ended with me lying in a puddle of blood for days. Hence the text message to my daughters, "I'm still alive." We all have the potential to imagine those stories, right? To imagine the stories of all the worst possible scenarios. All of those stories, they do not help. They do not foster hope. But we have a story that does. In fact, we have many stories that fosters hope. The Bible is full of stories, and every single one of these stories is set in anxious times. And yet in those anxious times, hope appears, and at the end of the story, hope wins. And sometimes in these stories, hope comes in the form of angels. It comes from dreams and visions, from prayer, from faith, from God. But in many of these stories, hope comes from other people. Moses had Aaron, Miriam, Jethro, and Joshua. David had Saul and Jonathan. Ruth had Naomi and Boaz. Esther had Mordecai. The Babylonian exiles had Isaiah. The early church had Peter, James, and John. Paul had Barnabas, Silas, Aquila, and Priscilla. And from the hope of these stories, from the help of these people, people were freed. A nation was formed. Justice was served. Home was regained. The church was born. And the gospel of hope won. In the midst of anxiety, that's what happens in our story. And so I ask you, what story are you a part of? We all tell ourselves stories. Make sure it's the right one. Number 3, belong somewhere. And stay connected regularly. Based from number 1 and number 2, I would suggest that you connect with people who are positive influences in your life. You know, those helpers who will help, and with the church, who can tell you the story of hope when you have forgotten how it goes. My daughter gave me a Google Assistant smart display. Anybody know what that is? 2 of you, good. Then the rest of you can understand that this might have been another source of anxiety for me, learning new technology, oh my goodness. But she gave me this Google Assistant smart display that has the capacity to receive electronically, virtually, images, photographs. She gave this to me so that she could give me photos of my granddaughter, so that I can watch her grow up, even from San Diego. Every day, I watch it. Every day I watch it. My daughter also encouraged me in the early days of the pandemic to try yoga with Adrian. Anybody know that? Yoga with Adrian? No. All right, there you go. A couple of you yoga fans. Yeah. Then those of you who know might know that I did this yoga with Adrian every week or every day, mostly, and at least once a week, I got to get into my own variation of the happy baby pose. Don't picture it, it's not pretty, but it feels really amazing. And every week, every Saturday, I sit down with my own anxiety and I listen and read and think about the story of faith. And I wrestle until I have something to say to you on Sunday morning, until I have the ability to share with you a little bit of hope that comes from the stories of our faith. And sometimes I can get the job done, and sometimes, to be honest, I feel like all I'm doing is relying on the fact that you're going to show up, and somehow together we'll experience God. And I know that through this past year and a half almost, it is whenever I have thought about you, that I have felt sane. Being in a new community in San Diego, it hasn't been easy, and yet every time I think about you at home, all across the nation, the world, when you send me your emails, every time I have thought about you as I visit with each of you on Zoom calls or fellowship times or committee meetings, every time I think about the possibility of having you all come together and be in person while still connecting with you, every time you send me a letter or an email, or every time I reach out to you and send a letter, and every time we are connected, I feel hope. I feel hope. So that's it. 1, 2, 3. I guess I forgot to read the manual on how you actually finish a 3-point sermon. Maybe it's just with this simple wish that I hope you too find hope in these 3 things. May it be so. Amen.